Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I wanted to give you an update to the OSWALD item combo control deck that I created the other day. The first video is linked probably in the description, you can just check my channel for it. But I did play 3 matches and I lost 2 unfortunately and won. This deck I think definitely has some great matchups into like aggro and mid-range kind of decks. You generate so much advantage and your Sisus put in a lot of work in combination with the ice blocks. But into other control decks, if you're a little bit slow to get started, some of the combo pieces that you can utilize just don't really do anything and you just fall behind and likely just lose the game because you lack the closing power against some of those top end decks, mainly into the mirror match of Ruby Sapphire that are playing the more traditional variation with like the Tamatoas and such. So with that in mind, I opted to update the deck, edit the deck a little bit to make it a little bit more resilient into those matchups. So I'm still opting for Sisu Emboldened Warrior. This thing is good because it's inkable. If you were opting to play the other Sisu, which is better, the human Sisu Daring Visitor, the issue with that is that you're going to increase your uninkable count. If you're okay with going past 18, then I would say playing 3 of the other Sisu is better. But I just like the inkability of this one, and so for that reason, I'm keeping this in here. We still have Oswald and Tipo on our 2-drop curve, Sisu and Hero on the 3-drop curve. The Hero combo piece, this one is funny because I think most of the time this card is ink. It's only when you're ready to set up. So after you've established control and you're ready to kind of close the game out, you really want to see this card and put your dime to the top of your deck or whatever combo piece you need. Of course, if you're in a situation where like putting Sword of Truth or something to the top of your deck would make a difference, then definitely do that because you can pay 2, get the Sword of Truth to the top of your deck, ink for turn, trigger the Oswald, get the Sword of Truth on the board for free, and then trigger the Sword of Truth for free. So basically you pay 2 ink to search your deck for a Sword of Truth and like banish an opponent's villain character for free, right? So it can be really useful in those kind of scenarios. But again, into the control matchups, opposing Ruby decks, Ruby Sapphire decks in particular, are running a lot of things that out this since it's a 0-3 body, right? The Sisu Daring Visitor, Brawls, big Sisus, of course, be prepared, things like that can all deal with it. Your Hierums are pretty straightforward, right? You play a ton of items since you are playing the Oswald, so the Hierum definitely works very, very well. Once you get the engine rolling, the deck is very hard to stop, I will say. But that being said, if people are actively stopping you and just constantly outing your threats and outing your, well, not threats, but outing your combo pieces, it can be very hard to move past that. The Prince John, after some testing again, like the Rhea with the Prince John was great, but I think it's just too much to try to like set up, right, with you going for other setups. So that was a lesson learned. I cut the Reyes for now. If you get the Prince John on board and you can activate him to get back an item, trigger, let's say a Maurice's Workshop to get a draw or 2, get an item back so that you draw off Popsicle that you brought back, and then quest with the Hierum to draw 2 more off that Popsicle. Like that's enough really, that if this gets banished, it's fine. Again, into the opposing Ruby Sapphire decks, this thing is vulnerable because Sisu, right, with Ice Block, Madame Medusa, if they're running that, Maui's once this is exerted, like there's a lot of threats that really threaten this. So even if you ready it up with the Rhea, it's still vulnerable. And like into other matchups, it can be very good, but I think you have good matchups into, like I said, the mid range and aggro already. Like you need to tech against the other control matchups, and for that reason, I think cutting the Rhea, keeping the Prince John, and just if the Prince John gets outed, that's fine. You can play through that because again, you don't necessarily need the Prince John. If you get one to stick and then you can constantly recycle the Plank and the Sword of Truth, that's great because that's your constant removal item. 4 Maui's pretty standard. We've cut the big Sisus from 4 down to 3 because again, into the other control matchups, this card just doesn't really do that much in the late game if it's your only form of removal. So we've opted to cut this. And then in order to just get that closing power that we need, I've opted to put in 3 Tamatoas. You really only need to see 1 because as you guys have seen, and maybe I'll throw in a match, like a demo match again in this video, you end up getting like 10 items on board. In the demo matches that I was playing, just for testing this version before I went into real matches, I ended on like 30 lore. It was like crazy, right? Because like the Tamatoa with the dime just, is insane. After I made this update, I did go 2-2. I need to test some more, but I did win 2 matches. One was against what do you call it, an emerald amethyst deck. So I just started getting all my items in rotations and stuff, and they just couldn't stop me. And then another one was against a sapphire steel, which again I have a pretty good matchup into, so maybe you shouldn't count those. I need to play more into ruby sapphire to see if this version is better, but that's what I ran my simulations against. So again, if you stick around, we'll go over that. I opted to update and put in brawls because, and actually this actually helped me in that emerald amethyst match that I played after I made this update, because I was able to get rid of Diablos. So this is definitely a card that you can include to help deal with pesky evasive threats, and Diablo is the main one you have to worry about. Since you're not running the small daring visitor, it's very hard to deal with those Sisus. Deal with the Diablos with the ice blocks if you're not running that smaller Sisu. You're only running this one, Emboldened Warrior. So the brawls, I would like to run 4, but 3 is fine. Also, one thing I will note, I should be on maybe 64 cards. And the reason for that is the same reason why you'd run 60 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? When you have one of combo pieces, you really don't want to draw them. In the 3 matches that I played with the original version of the deck, the one that I won and one of the ones that I lost, I hard drew my lucky dime early, like within the first 3 turns. And I think one of them I mulliganed into it. And it was just like a dead card in my hand. And I'm like, this sucks because I can't put it to the top of the deck with Hero anymore. I can't play it off the Prince John. So if it's stuck in your hand, you're forced to hard cast it. And that's really bad for you. So you definitely want to be getting the dime set up if you can with the Hero into the OSWALD. And if you hard draw it, that really sucks. So increasing the count of your deck with like more, I don't know, like lower end or mid-range options to stabilize could be better so that you avoid drawing your one-ofs. So that's something to consider. I did also opt to put in 3 Be Prepared because again, once you're like your opponent, if you're in a control mirror, if they're on removal, they're going to be aiming to stop your combo pieces. They're going to try to stop your Prince Johns. They're going to be aggressively trying to stop your Hurons, stopping your Oswalds, and they're going to commit things into the board, right, in order to do those things. And so if they're wasting their time trying to out your setup, and you don't have a setup anymore, if you're able to reset with a Be Prepared, they've likely exhausted a lot of resources to do that. So Be Prepared makes a lot of sense in this deck, especially since you draw so much. You should have no problem being able to like just hold on to a Be Prepared and just be like, okay, now is the time, cast it. And you should just always have an option at the ready, either Big Sisu or Be Prepared. You play enough cards to ink and to draw that you should be able to generate that advantage. If you don't get your engines rolling and you don't have the card draw, like I spectated like I think one person using this build. I'm pretty sure it was this build, and they were just playing it incorrectly in my opinion. They weren't valuing like the card draw, and their hand was like empty like all the time, and I'm like, that's not how you have to play this deck. You like Ruby Sapphire, you want options in your hand. And again, if you've seen the way that this deck should be played, it should have a very large hand, because your goal is that you really want to see the Maurice's Workshop and or Hiram early, and then start generating the advantage off of that. Moving on to the items, we did cut back just a little bit. I cut the Shield of Virtue, because again, we're not really going for that whole let's ready things up all the time with the Rhea and the Shield of Virtue. Still on the 1 Vitalosphere. This card in all the matches that I played, which is like 5 of them, right? Before the update and after the update, this card never like really came into play for me to actually use the ability. I still think you want to keep it, but yeah, I don't know. The fact that you can get Maui to 8 strength, get Sisu to 7 strength to run over a castle, Maui to run over a library, just for locations, I guess it's good. But you're not playing the Hero Shark, or Maui Shark, which is really what this card wants to see now. So there's an option to cut this. 3 Ice Block, pretty standard. Still 4 Popsicle, 1 the Plank. I opted to also put in a Crossbow. So because you generate a lot of ink, especially into the late game, having a card like this can be really useful to increase the value of your Big Sisu, making a character get -2, right? Then you can Big Sisu it away. Also, kind of comes up in the control mirror. You banish this, banish Chosen Dragon character. You can banish the Big Sisu on the opposing end. You can banish Maleficent Dragon. Although you probably shouldn't be doing that with this card, because again, you can banish Big Sisu with the Plank, and you can banish the Maleficent Dragon with the Sword of Truth, since it's a villain. So you have I guess just multiple options here. I did cut the Poisoned Apple just because I wasn't seeing any princesses at all anywhere, and the Exerting ability just never really mattered too much. Like I did it a few times. I added a Hiram with it once, but and again in the control mirror, but it never really mattered like all that much, honestly. So I opted to cut it because again, it was just another uninkable, and if I was going to add Be Prepared, I wanted to cut back on some of the existing uninkables. 2 fish bones, I think that's still fine. Again, you could opt to play 3 if you really wanted to, just because once you get your draw engine online, you can really start aggressively to ink, right? Once you're drawing like 3 cards a turn with like Maurice's Workshop, potentially 4 cards with Hiram and Workshop. 1 Stone Dragon, this is a really good card to set up early on, I would say, if you can. Like if your opponent isn't too aggressive with you, you can start getting like the T-Pos and the Oswalds that they out into your Inkwell early on, and just generating a ton of advantage that way. And obviously the Great Stone Dragon will trigger Oswald on the field to look at the top card to get it into your item zone as well. Only 2 Maurice's Workshop. I think this is fine. You don't really want to draw this and hardcast it. So again, this is another card that you can opt to set up with the hero if you wanted to, if you're valuing a lot of that card draw. I think playing this card is very nuanced though. I think a lot of people don't really know how to use this card, myself probably included. But you have to be very aware of the tempo loss that you get with when you use a card like this. You have to know when you want to trigger it and when you have to just say like, I'm not triggering it, or I'm not really playing items to draw cards right now because I need to like do something else to deal with the opponent's board. So this card is great because it's really nice to just have a reliable like draw engine aside from Hiram, because this card just gets decimated, right? When this card comes down, thankfully it's on play and not just only on quest, because once it hits the field in the control mirror, it's getting Brawled, it's getting Small Sea Suit, it's getting, you know, Maleficent Dragon, it's getting Medusa, it's getting Be Prepped, it's getting Big Sea Suit. There's so many removal things for this card. Like in the control mirror, this card will never survive to quest, most likely, unless your opponent like drew really terribly and like couldn't play on curve and couldn't get any of their own draw engines rolling. But in that case, you're winning the game anyways. So, you know, having the Maurice's Workshop, I think in the control mirror, this one's even more valuable than the Hiram. Like getting the Hiram on the board is still really important to draw 2, and then forcing your opponent to have the answer to remove it. But the Maurice's Workshop is just a more reliable draw engine. But again, it comes at the cost of ink, right? So keep that in mind. Sword of Truth and 1 Lucky Dime. Even modern versions of Ruby Sapphire, like adapting from previous sets, are running 1 Lucky Dime now, some of them. If you can afford to run 2, that's great. But yes, if it gets hideawayed, that's really bad. But ideally, you know, once you get this card on board, you really only want to play this when you're just like, I'm ready to close the game out. I'm ready to dime my Tamatoa for like 10 to 12 and win the game. If it gets hidden away, if it gets Cusco'd into your Inkwell, that can be a problem in the mirror match. But again, people are really only on 1 hideaway. If you've seen that they discarded the hideaway or something, or used it on something else and it's in their discard, be very mindful not to play into a Maui Shark. So, you know, even if they don't have the Vitalosphere and Shark on field, it only costs 8 ink to get that combo, right? You play the Maui Shark for 6, you play the Vitalosphere, that's 7, then you activate Vitalosphere, that's 8 ink. Maui Shark now has Rush and can take out a threat, get back the hideaway. But then they need 2 to cast the hideaway, so they need a total of 10 ink in order to get everything off at once. So just keep that in mind in the control mirrors. But yeah, this is the updated deck list. I guess I can show you a bit of a simulation to show you how the deck performs. So in this simulation, I queued up Styler's version of Ruby Sapphire, which is pretty much the status quo or the bar, because it's more or less what you can expect if you see a Ruby Sapphire deck, right? The Madame Medusas, the How Far I'll Go still in the deck, Maleficent Dragon, the Maui Shark, etc. Visions of the Future, you know, Sail the Azurite Sea. The things that make Ruby Sapphire very, very good. They're going first. They start off with Popsicle into Azurite Sea. We do not have a 1-drop, so we are very far behind. And they get a second Popsicle out, which is just like, I guess, the best start you can get for a Ruby Sapphire, more or less. So we're really behind it here. But we're going to go ahead and drop the Oswald on 2 at least and pass turn. We do have the hero that we could potentially try to set up for the next turn. But the opponent here is going to aggressively continue to ramp. And hopefully the CPU wasn't throwing too hard, you know, double ramp with the T-Boat into Fishbone. Maybe if they were sitting on a lot of uninkables, that made a lot of sense. But I can't imagine that the CPU would be programmed to like ink Hirams in that situation. Like, is there a last card of Hiram? We'll find out. Anyways, we're going to ink, miss off the Oswald there, that's fine. And because I only have one card in hand, I'm like, yeah, if it's a hero, I'll set up the hero now. If it's a Maui or something, I'm not threatened yet, but they do have a small Sisu, so that really sucks because that disrupts the hero search into the Oswald, which would have had me very nicely setting up to basically, get the Sword of Truth, the plank, and those kind of things into rotation to constantly deal with the opponent's board here. But they do end up inking their whole hand, and I didn't see if I got that workshop off of the Oswald or if I had to hard cast it. I think I hard casted it because I also cast the Popsicle. The opponent top decks the Madame Medusa though, and I'm just like, okay, yep, that's really good. And you can see what I was talking about in the deck profile, right? In these control mirrors, the small Sisus, the Madame Medusas, they put in a lot of work against your cards, and they out the Oswalds too, which can hurt. But this deck is built for more than one thing, right? That's how you got to build the deck. You can't just be like, oh, they out of my Oswald, my deck's over now, the combo's over. No, you've got Hurons, you've got Prince Johns, you've got ways to fight back into the matchup, and that's what you need here, right? So they top deck, they ink with the Fishbone, so they must have top decked something like a Tipo or whatnot, most likely. They're gonna go ahead and continue to quest. They got a decent sized board, but we're not too threatened here. We're still in the phase that we can afford to set up a little bit more. Here you can see again, just the 3-drop Sisu just isn't cutting it too much in these control mirrors. It's mainly for the mid-range decks, and as a shift target still. But because we've cut back on the small Sisus and we have Be Prepareds, we're not so reliant on getting that Sisu out. But like I said, we can afford to set up a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and attempt to prepare for a shift line just to slow the opponent down. We do waste a couple of these items, air quotes, and by waste I mean we're not optimally playing them to trigger the workshop. And this is again what I was talking about in the deck profile, where you have to know when you really say, do I just forego the fact that I can draw an extra card with the workshop because I just need to develop stuff on board, and sometimes that's what you need to do here. So yeah, the opponent takes out, in this scenario, maybe they should have taken out the hero, thrown everything into it, right? Dealing 6 damage. They would have lost their Tipo and their Sisu in the process. But I guess maybe it doesn't matter, right? Because at this point you can see the workshop is going to make the difference. The hero has survived long enough to generate me the advantage, and this is exactly the scenario that, maybe not exactly the scenario, but one of the scenarios where just the Be Prepared reset just does so much work here, because normally you would expect them to take out your Hiram. The opposing Ruby Sapphire play would be very aggressive in taking out your Hiram, but you already have the workshop up, and now at this point I feel very comfortable, right? The opponent hasn't seen a Hiram yet, and we're just able to set up fully. It's just like the workshop made the difference there. Speaking of which, then they finally get their Hiram top deck here, and now they have an engine online. But you can bet that we are definitely going to aim to take that out with the big Sisu. So first we can play Prince John, trigger workshop, draw 2, because we still can ink for turn and get back up to 8 ink, and play the big Sisu to take out the Hiram. They have 2 cards in hand. Yes, they could have a Maui, but I'm not too threatened there. They drop Tamatoa instead, and I'm like, okay, we have the Sword of Truth, so that's really good for us because we can, develop Oswald, activate Sword of Truth for free. I think I didn't realize I had the Sword of Truth, and then I was like, oh yeah, I have the answer to Tamatoa, of course. Because I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do against this Tamatoa? This thing just beats me, right? Oh man, yeah, I should have probably activated Sword of Truth first and then brought it back, but I guess this is fine too. Draw 2 off the Popsicle recursion, and then use Sword of Truth to banish the Tamatoa. Quest with the Sisu, and again we're just in control. The opponent does have 3 cards in hand, but we have a ton, and this is what I was talking about with this matchup, with this deck. You should be focusing on what draw, how do I set up my draw engines, because this is how you win the game, right? If you get Be Prepped and stuff here, it doesn't matter. You just rebuild. And because you're running 3 Tamatoas, you can maybe afford to throw 1 or 2 Tamatoas out there naked, and if it gets removed with the Maleficent Dragon or a B Prep, that's fine. But ideally you want to make sure you at least keep 1 back for after you have the dime established, so that you can drop Tamatoa Diamond right away and just get a massive amount of lore. The Oswald questing for 2 is also pretty big. Don't be afraid to say I've gotten my value out of my Oswald, now I just need to start questing with him. If he gets outed, that's fine. We're on 11 ink here. We're going to go ahead and play the plank, draw off of the double workshop there. Still have 6 ink to work with. We play the Stone Dragon instead of the crossbow. Draw 2 again. We're down to 1 ink. And again, we're not worried about anything here. The opponent's on 2 cards. We have the Prince John and the Sisu on board. So I'm gonna activate and play Prince John to recur the Sword of Truth. Okay, not being able to trigger the workshops, and that's fine. They get another Hiram on the opponent's side, which is fair. They haven't seen one in the early game, so they've seen 2 now. They get the how far I'll go out, and the ramp at this point, we're out ramping them. We have more card advantage. We have better draw engines up. So this match now should be a foregone conclusion. And so this is what I was talking about when I was saying hopefully these improvements make the deck a little bit better. And drawing the lucky dime here now is not as detrimental as drawing it in the early game, because we have enough ink to make use of it. We don't need the hero setup. The hero and into the Oswald setup is really for, like I was saying, when you want to just aim to close out the game very quickly now, or in the middle part of the game when you're looking to set up your removal threats, right? Like your Sword of Truth, your planks. Otherwise, in this scenario, like I just have control of the game, so I don't need to really go for any setups because I just have control of the game. So yeah, we're just gonna continue to build up the resources here. Now we have free ink as well. The Oswald doesn't really play a role here at this point, and this is why I added the Tamatoas to the build, because now we need the closing power. We need the ability to just close out the game. The opponent, I think, I guess, yeah, activating the Vitalosphere there does make sense because they wanted to rush in with it. They heal up the Maleficent Dragon, and they have to know that we have an answer, right? The CPU. So here we play the crossbow, and we could use crossbow to banish itself if we wanted to, but we do have the Sword of Truth, so we can just use that instead, which we should. Yep, no, don't use the crossbow. Use the Sword of Truth there. There we go. Banish the Maleficent Dragon. We're on how much lore? 13. Okay, play the lucky dime, and this is again what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Play the dime first. Get it ready to use with the Tamatoa, so that when you drop Tamatoa, you can just win the game. But we have enough ink to play dime, activate dime, go to 19 off the Sisu, play Popsicle, draw a card. Again, not triggering the workshops. We're down to 15 cards left in our deck, by the way. The opponent drops their own dime, but again, their deck just isn't built to go critical mass on the items like we are. So now we're going to be able to drop Tamatoa, okay, recur a Vitalosphere. We still have, what, 6 ink to work with there, or 8 or something? 6, okay. Play an Ice Block, draw a card, don't draw another card, play the Vitalosphere if you haven't already. Where is it? There it is at the end. Okay, the Tamatoa is what, like plus, I can't even see it on the screen, plus 11. Okay, we still got 2 ink available. Okay, card ability, nope, quest. No, don't quest. We're going to win off dime. Yeah, so I guess it's time to activate the dime and go to 33 lore. There you go. So, yeah. I mean, again, this is just a simulation. It's going to play out differently against a human player, but ideally, those are some of the things you want to go for in the control mirror, and that's why I made the updates to the deck. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Let me know what you think. Quantum is out.